Hi there and welcome to Planet Zoo with the Wetlands Animal Pack. This is a quick video tour of the realistic Asian small-clawed otter habitat I've created. So for this build, I did some research, which is rare for me. I don't normally research these things and I probably should do it more. Anyway, for this build, I did some research on what otter zoo habitats actually look like, and I followed the guidelines on how real habitats are developed. So what this means, this has resulted in a kind of split habitat. So we've got the outdoor section here, then there's an indoor habitat section and viewing area, and then the building at the back there houses a back of house behind the scenes section. So that's where the otters will get cared for. The outside section here, the main focus of this is the little stream I've got running through it. And this runs right through the habitat, so from the waterfalls back here, and then that flows over to a filtration system I've set up at the side. The offshoot here flows into a small deep water pool, and that's right by the viewing area so that people can see the otters doing their deep diving. Up at the side here, I've also got in the mud bath enrichment. My idea with how all of this is set up, I watched some videos on otter habitat design, and they explained how with the otters' natural behaviours, they're incredibly playful animals. So it's important to build in lots of separate areas for them to express their natural behaviours. So we've got the shallow river here for them to lounge in, and the deep water section for diving, and obviously the raised mud bath for bathing in mud. I've put the feeding area up at the back here so that they can eat in peace. I imagine that it'll get rather noisy and crowded around the viewing area, so having somewhere just a little set back so they can eat their food without disruption, I thought that might be a good idea. So that's the outside section. It's decorated with lots of rocks. I'd noticed in the real life builds that they always use a lot of rocks at different levels, and it was like some of them I was looking at, it was all up the back wall like this. So I've replicated that to make it a little more realistic. So let's move on to one of the other sections. Around the side here is the entrance to the indoor viewing area, and back here I've also added a pop-up adoption point. So not something functional in the game, but I think it adds to the realism. I could imagine something like this being here in a real zoo, because it's like prime location if people are queuing to get into the indoor viewing section. So something for them to look at and maybe persuade them to go and adopt an otter. The other side here, I've also put in this little planter section. So that's separating the otter centre from whatever else might be in the zoo. You might have a normal path just walking up to other places in the zoo behind that. So a nice way to section it off. And I think it also helps to form a barrier for any queue into the indoor section here. I've gone for a wavy style with the planter, and this is a theme that I've got running throughout, representing the twists and turns of a river. I have also added this little kind of corny, utterly amazing sign. I made this originally for the giant otter habitat whenever the DLC released for that, but I think it fits in well here too, so I figured why not reuse it here as well. The otter silhouette on this, I created this out of art shapes, tiny little art shapes. Don't ask me how long it took, it was too long. Let's just leave it at that. Anyway, let's take a look inside. So the indoor part of the habitat is split. So you've got the otter side here, and this side is for viewing. I've used the river wall mural piece here to give this indoor section a bit of life. And for the flooring, I used the mulch patch piece for the flooring. Now, you might think that's a bit weird, but what I was going for here, I've seen in real zoos, they have this sort of like replicated dirt flooring that they use. And it's kind of like a rubbery, spongy texture. And I think it just helps set the scene of being inside the habitat. So that's why I've gone with that. For the otter side of things, we've got the huge viewing windows here, and that looks into the indoor shallow pool. I've also set up some enrichment items in here, and at the back here, we've got some bedding set up here on the raised blocks, which the otters do seem to really enjoy using, and it's a pretty nice view for the guests as well, seeing the otters asleep up there. The way through into this indoor section for the otters, well, there's two ways in. To come in directly from the outdoor habitat area, there's a hole in the wall and a wooden ramp up. Now, I was fiddling with this for a while to get it working. In a real otter habitat, The way through here would be much smaller, but alas, we have hitboxes to contend with in Planet Zoo, so I've had to make this gap in the rocks much larger than you'd see in real life. I also originally used dead wood and branches to make the ramp, but the otters refused to do any climbing whatsoever in the game, so I replaced this with the wooden ramp so they could get through. That's not as bad a compromise for the ramp as it was for the big hole. It would be really nice to have a tiny little entrance here for the otters to get through. It's kind of replicating what they'd have in real life, but with hitboxes being a thing, that's not to be. The other entrance for the otters into this section takes them through from the back of house section. So a little ramp here, which is actually big enough for the keepers to get through as well, so that they can clean inside this indoor area. So let's go through here. So this is the behind the scenes area that I've set up to add a bit of realism to the build. I've not really bothered building anything like this before, but I think it does add a lot to the build. Adding something like this at the back that the guests can't see, it's also great for ensuring the build meets the otters' space requirements without making the viewable sections too big. Anyway, back here, the area is split, so you've got the animal side and the non-animal side. This is how it would be split in real life, so there's always a separation of the animals from the exit. That's why on the animal side, there's also a double lock entranceway here. So you've got your first one is the habitat gate, and then I've added this improvised gate here, which will be closed at all times to prevent animal escapes. In the animal side, I've also set up the sleeping section, so if this was real, the otters would be kept here at night to keep them safe whilst the zoo is closed. I've also got viewing windows from the non-animal side to keep an eye on them from here too. The other feature I've added in the animal side is a respite pool. So this is a deep water pool away from public viewing. I think this would also come in handy for keeping an eye on any poorly otters that might need to be kept inside or such like. I do have to confess though, part of the reason this pool is back here is because the water terraforming that I've created in the public viewing section of the habitat, that wasn't enough to fulfill the otters' deep diving requirements. I didn't want to add more water out there because I've gone for a very specific aesthetic out there that matches up to otter enclosures I was replicating from the real world. Adding additional space and water back a house, it means the animal welfare is right without ruining the look of the viewable sections. That's a trick that I've been using a lot recently with my Planet Zoo habitat builds, and I think it's a great way to deal with that issue of, oh, you think the habitat's too big for the animals' needs? Well, just stick a section back a house with more space, and that means you can tighten things up in the viewable areas to make it look how you want it to look. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble again, so let's get back to looking at the enclosure. So the non-animal side of the back of house section here, I've got a keeper station set up in here, so it's really easy to feed the animals and prepare food from here. Down the side here, I've got some clutter set up in here, all relating to the otters' enrichment, so some feeders, bowls, boxes and things. And oh, just behind here, I've got a container that's full of the otters' beach balls. Before building this habitat, I'd never really thought of it before, but in real back house zoo sections, they must have spaces like this set up to keep all the animals' welfare stuff, so I thought it'd be nice to add it in here. And I'm not sure if this last section here is realistic, but I've added some recreation space for the keepers. So we've got some lockers set up here and a little kitchen section with a sink and coffee maker. If anyone knows, let me know if this is something you might find in a real place like this, or if I'm wildly off the mark adding this in here. So the way I've set all this up, everything's sectioned off so that the keepers can get around and the space is split. So you've got very public section, you've got the animal section, and then you've got the staff sections all planned out. The doorway here leads through to the indoor viewing area, so you might get staff coming through here to give animal talks, and it's a way for staff to get through to the front without having to go through the animal section of the enclosure at all. Around the back of the enclosure, I've put in the utility hubs here because I feel like this would be something you'd have close to the habitat, but out of public view. The water purification particularly, since we set up a lot of water filtration in the enclosure itself. This little section sticking out the back here, this is meant to represent the power generation and filtration system for the waterfall in the enclosure. So it's sitting directly behind the waterfall there. It's also covering up a tiny little bit of the waterfall that was clipping through the fence as well. So yeah, secret there. tying all this in, there's another staff only entrance at the back here, and that takes staff around to the front of the outdoor viewing area. And I've decorated this with the rocks and the wooden planks and stuff, so it's away from public view, but it's a nice way to tie in that staff can get fully around the enclosure. So yeah, that brings us back around to where we started the tour from. So that's the full build. I'm happy with it. I think it's a nice self-contained otter center sort of thing. If you want to check it out yourself, it's on the Steam Workshop now. There's a link to that in the comments. I have just one quick note on the Steam Workshop blueprints. When you place the blueprints in game, make sure the habitat gate lines up exactly with the ground. You need the path part that shows up on the habitat gate to lie flush with the ground. Otherwise, the indoor shallow pool refuses to load water into it. I have no idea why it's doing that. I did try and fiddle with it to see if I could fix it, but no joy. Everything else works fine, and I've set it all up to be maximum welfare and enrichment to accommodate around 14 otters in total. So I hope you've enjoyed this little tour. Let me know what you think of the habitat in the comments. And as ever, thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.